Well, I am curious if any of you now or in the past have been landlords or owners of rental properties. Oh, wow, quite a few of you. I just wanted this morning to offer you my condolences. I have heard so many horror stories from friends and acquaintances of mine who are landlords or own rental properties. Horror stories about bad tenants, tenants who mistreat and abuse property that doesn't even belong to them. Now, when Greg and I were B&B owners, we had a little bit of a taste of that. We were always surprised and disappointed when guests in our own home would trash their rooms or damage furnishings. Today's parable that Jesus tells is called the parable of the bad tenants. That's the name of the parable. And Jesus is saying that the kingdom belongs to God. God is the landlord. But there are bad tenants who are mistreating and abusing that kingdom. And did you notice after Jesus told the parable, it said the Pharisees and the chief priests, the religious authorities of Jesus' day, realized that Jesus was speaking about them. Jesus was saying that they were the bad tenants. And you heard that because Jesus was referring to them as the bad tenants, they wanted to arrest him right then and there. But they were afraid of the crowds because the crowds so loved Jesus. This gospel is a continuation of last Sunday's gospel. And if you were here, you remember Jesus was questioning the religious and political authorities of his day. He was challenging them, and he was getting into some dangerous territory. After he calls them bad tenants in today's gospel, in just one more week, they will indeed arrest him, and Jesus will be put to death. Jesus is placing himself in great danger by speaking truth to power. If we are truly to call ourselves Christians, followers of his way, we need to do the same. So let's look at this parable together and see what it's all about. It said that there was a landlord who had a vineyard, and he leased it to tenants to take care of it for him. And when the harvest came and it was time to collect his produce, he sent in servants. But the bad tenants stoned and beat and killed those servants. So the landlord says, well, I'll send in my son. Of course they're going to respect my son. But you see that they kill the son. Jesus is not being very subtle here, is he? It's pretty obvious what he's saying. He's saying that the vineyard is God's kingdom. The landlord is God. The servants that were sent in were the prophets, people like John the Baptist. And the son, of course, is Jesus. So it's very obvious what Jesus is doing here. And it's obvious that the Pharisees and the chief priests and the religious authorities recognize that Jesus is calling them the bad tenants because they are mistreating and abusing God's kingdom. Now that has been going on by religious authorities for thousands of years. This month, 500 years ago, we're celebrating the anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. So 500 years ago, during the month of October, Martin Luther nailed 95 theses on a church door in Germany. And he was calling out the religious authorities of his day, the Roman Catholic Church, of which Martin Luther was a part. Martin Luther was a monk in the Roman Catholic Church. But in his theses, he was calling out these religious authorities. And he was calling them out for things like the selling of indulgences, in which people, believers, the faithful, had to pay money to the church in order for their sins to be forgiven. And Martin Luther was also challenging the wealth of the church, saying that the Pope was one of the richest people on the planet. And why couldn't he use his own money to build the basilica at the Vatican rather than taking money from poor believers? Dangerous, dangerous words. But he was speaking truth to power. And because of that, the Protestant Reformation began. And that's why we're here. Our denomination, the United Church of Christ, this is part of our history. We say in the UCC today, we are reformed and we're always reforming. We come from this reforming tradition, which is all about reform, restore, and renew the face of the earth. We're not waiting for Jesus to come back and do it for us. We realize that we are the second coming of the Christ, and that we are the ones we've been waiting for. So that's what we in the United Church of Christ believe. But as you heard in your words of integration this morning, there are two different schools of thought in Christianity today. There's, as we heard, the Simon Peter interpretation of Jesus, and there's the Mary Magdalene interpretation of Jesus. Simon Peter took a very literal approach. He believed Jesus was the only one who was divine. And he believed that Jesus was calling us to establish a church. Mary Magdalene understood that Jesus was not the sole exception, that he was the great example. He was showing us the way. And that it wasn't to establish a church, but to transform ourselves and our way of life. Now, of course, the church leaders, the people who were establishing the church were men. They embraced Simon Peter's interpretation. And they not only dismissed the gospel of Mary Magdalene, they hid it away. And that's why those of us growing up in the Christian church never heard that. We never heard about Mary's interpretation. We never heard about the Christian mystics who understood that Jesus wasn't giving us rules. He was trying to have us follow his way of life and make that the foundation of our lives. Now, our first reading this morning from Exodus that Eric read for us was, of course, the 10 Commandments. And if you talk to most Christians today, they might say, yes, the 10 Commandments, that's the foundation of my faith. And the 10 Commandments are good, but I've told you before, I think the 10 Commandments are elementary. I think they're really easy. I don't know about you, I don't really struggle to live them out. It's easy for me to love God. My life is so blessed. It's easy for me to honor my mother and father. They were such wonderful people. It is easy for me to honor the Sabbath. It's a day of rest. I wish we had more of them to honor. Okay? I never get up in the morning and have this urge to rob someone and to steal their possessions. Do you? And I've shared this with you before. I have never, ever, in my entire life, ever coveted my neighbor's wife. The 10 Commandments, the 10 Commandments are easy. The way of Jesus is hard. We have Christians in America today who want to have the 10 Commandments displayed in public buildings, like public schools and public courthouses and government offices. But I bet you they would never display the way of Jesus. Never. Can you imagine if our elected officials walked into government buildings every day for work, and up there it had the way of Jesus, which says, feed the hungry, care for the sick, welcome the stranger, honor the least of these. They don't want to see that. Can you imagine if in our public courthouses it said things like, bless those who persecute you, forgive those who have wronged you, turn the other cheek. The Ten Commandments are easy. The way of Jesus is hard. But the way of Jesus is what we are to make the foundation of our life. Not dogma and doctrine of a church. The way of Jesus, that's to be our cornerstone, the foundation of our lives. When you forgive 70 times, 7 times, when you feed the sick and welcome the stranger, and do all of those things that Jesus commanded, then you are truly following the way of the Christ. So Jesus in today's gospel refers to himself as the cornerstone. He wasn't saying he, Jesus, the man from Nazareth, was the cornerstone. That isn't what he's saying. He's saying this way of life that I am demonstrating for you, this is the way. Make that the cornerstone of your lives. And that's why in the scripture it tells us we are living stones. Jesus, the Christ, the way is the cornerstone, and we are the living stones. But as it says that the cornerstone was rejected, it also says, you too are living stones who will be rejected by men, but approved nonetheless and precious in God's sight. And what that means is when we follow this way of life, we will be rejected. When you speak truth, your own truth, when you speak truth to the powers that be, you're going to be rejected. You're going to lose family members who don't like what you have to say. You're going to lose friends. But what we hear is that although we will be rejected, we have God's favor and God's love because we are doing what Jesus instructed us to do. So I want to today encourage all of you. I know that you in this room, you're truth tellers. And I know that this year has been a difficult one for you with speaking truth to power. I know many of you are discouraged and many of you are dismayed. Please take courage. Do not fear. God's favor is with us. God's love is with us. Let us this Sunday make a renewed commitment to be the truth tellers, the reformers, the restorers. God is counting on us to renew the face of the earth, to bring about the kingdom of heaven. We're being called to do that. So let us be good tenants of God's kingdom so that we can renew the face of the earth and bring about the kingdom of heaven. Namaste.